neutrality for convenience, or the mechanical splitting of differences. Rather, it is a disciplined commitment to principled pragmatism. It requires policymakers to interrogate evidence carefully, draw from diverse ideological traditions where appropriate, and to resist the pull of rigid partisan extremes. Complex challenges such as poverty alleviation, healthcare delivery, educational reforms, and economic transformation rarely yield to binary solutions. Effective policy formulation must therefore integrate competing perspectives while remaining faithful to constitutional values and long-term national interests. In a nation as diverse as Ghana, ethically, religiously, regionally, and socio-economically, centrist governance is not merely a philosophical preference. It is a practical necessity. Sustainable public policy must build consensus without silencing dissent. Balance fiscal realities with social equity and prioritize inclusive growth. It must ensure that development outcomes reflect the collective aspirations of all Ghanaians. Ultimately, today's lecture is an invitation to meaningfully dialogue. Dialogue characterized by intellectual honesty, respectful disagreement, and openness to alternative perspectives. This would definitely guarantee integrity of the discourse here. The goal is not uniformity of opinion, but a deeper understanding of how balanced, evidence-informed policy-making can support Ghana's democratic consolidation. As our democracy continues to evolve, its resilience will depend on sustained civic engagement, responsible leadership, and a shared commitment to the public good. It is my fervent hope and earnest expectation that participants leave this forum with a clearer appreciation of Parliament's role, a deeper understanding of centrism as a governing philosophy, and a renewed dedication to the responsibilities of democratic citizenship. May today's conversation be bold, honest, respectful, and ultimately secure for us and posterity the blessings of liberty, equality of opportunities, and prosperity. I thank you.
Thank you, the Clerk to Parliament, Mr. Ebenezer Ahuma Jetro. We have with us the second Deputy Minority Whip, the Honorable Jerry Ahmed Shaibu, MP for Wejagbawe. The next on the program is a remark from the majority leader and leader of government business. He's a distinguished legislator, an inspiration to many of us as young MPs. Let's welcome the Honorable Mahama Ayariga, Majority Leader.
to add that. Okay. Thank you very much. Right Honorable Second Deputy Speaker, the Clerk of Parliament, my colleague, the Minority Leader, colleague members of Parliament who are here, and I see very senior friends of mine who have come to join us, and former members of this house who are here. I welcome all of you to this important function. But for the way people voted, somebody would have been vice president. But maybe I would not have had the benefit of sitting with him in a room like this. So, my big brother, you're welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, friends from the media, this indeed is a momentous occasion. The Night Parliament has indeed built on the many gains of the previous Parliament of the Fourth Republic, and I'm very happy to be part of such great additions to our country's democracy. That's why I'm not just happy, but also honored to give these remarks as a precursor to the lecture that will be delivered by the Honorable Minority Leader at this maiden edition of the Public Affairs Subdivision's Public Lecture, aimed at demystifying the institutions of Parliament, bringing it closer to the people, and ultimately engendering effective citizen participation in our legislative process. Let me veer off a little from my speech. When I became the majority leader, the first thing that I did was to work with the Public Affairs Department to establish a television station for Parliament House. That's the first thing that I did. And because of that, proceedings are now live on national television. Across the country, everybody gets to watch proceedings live. They don't have to wait till evening and then, after the news, CTFM will report today in Parliament and then give some highlights of what could have happened during that day. Now, citizens, when they are available and even when they are busy in their offices, will just be watching their televisions, and then they'll be following debates in Parliament, how their issues are being addressed in Parliament. And that has indeed given a lot of attention to Parliament in recent times. But what it has also done is that when we finish proceedings, we tend not to have a lot of content. So we have to keep repeating and repeating and repeating the proceedings of the previous day. And then we keep repeating these interviews of members of Parliament. I'm sure people are bored of those interviews being repeated, every single day. And so we have to develop content. We have to develop content so that at all times there's something new in terms of what our television station is broadcasting. I find this initiative to have these lecture series as something that will go to assist our station to develop content that can be broadcast and continue to engage the public. I know some may be thinking that centrism is just a fancy word for people who cannot make up their minds. Let us journey together through what centrism actually means, not in a political sense, but in the lived reality of our country. Ghana, because of the story of centrism, is in many ways the story of how we have governed ourselves. Understanding the left and the right. To understand centrism, we must first understand what it sits between. On one hand, on one end of the political spectrum, we have the left. center left, and far left. On the other hand, we have the right, center right, and then the far right. The political left, in its classical sense, believes in the active role of the state. It believes that inequality is not natural, it is structural. That if you are born poor, it is not simply because you did not work hard enough, it is because systems, institutions, and histories have stacked the odds against you. And therefore, it is the job of government to intervene, to redistribute wealth, to provide public services, to regulate markets, to protect workers, to ensure that every citizen has a floor beneath their feet below which they cannot fail. On the other side, the political right, in its classical sense, believes in the primacy of individual freedom and the power of the free market. It argues that when government tries to do too much, it does most things badly. It creates bureaucracy and stifles innovation and obstructs private enterprise. The right says, get the state out of the way, let businesses compete, let individuals make their own choices, let the market determine prices, let merit determine outcomes, and in the long run, the rising tide will lift all boats. This is the tradition that gave birth to privatization, deregulation, low-tax economies, entrepreneurship culture, and here in Ghana, it resonated in sentiments like, let the private sector lead, create the conditions for business to thrive, trust the Ghanaian entrepreneur. Both of these traditions have produced resolve. Both have also produced failures. The far left, taken to its extreme, has produced states that are bloated, corrupt, and repressive, where the government controls everything and citizens control nothing. The far right, taken to its extreme, has produced societies of savage inequality, where a handful of people own almost everything and the majority struggle to survive. This is where centrism becomes a mitigating factor. Centrism may sound cautious or even denote indecision. After all, political ideologies conventionally must pander to either the left or the right. That, after all, is what distinguishes socialism from capitalist, and it is what capitalism, and that is what, in conventional terms, political parties and their ideologies must show. So to some, perhaps, centrism becomes a convenient place to stand when one does not wish to offend either side. But I want to suggest that in the Ghanaian experience, centrism is none of those things. True centrism is the deliberate, principled decision to draw from both traditions, to take what works from the left and what works from the right, and to apply them not based on ideology, but based on evidence, context, and the actual needs of the people. A centrist government can support free market principles in one breath and defend robust public investments in the next, because it understands the reality is more complex than any single ideology can capture. It does not ask whether a policy left or it does not ask whether a policy is left or right, but interrogates whether the policy works, whether it improves the lives of the people, if it is just or sustainable. Center-left politics leans towards using the state to address inequality and provide social services, while still accepting the market as the primary engine of growth. Center-right politics leans towards trusting the market and limiting government interventions, while accepting that some regulations and some social provision is necessary. These two center positions, center-left and center-right, are closer to each other than their fringes would have you believe. And in many of the world's most successful democracies, governance alternates between these two centrist poles. The result is stability, growth, and progress. Now, what has been the Ghanaian experience of centrism? As Ghana is a fascinating case study in centrism, not because we deliberately designed it that way, but because our history, our culture, and our constitutional architecture have conspire to produce it naturally for us here in Ghana, in our political life. Centrism has even been a source of comfort. At this point, let me veer off from my speech and just indicate that when it comes to the debate about centrism, center-right, center-left, and all that, far right, far left, and all that, I find that our constitution is clear on what should be the political ideology of Ghana. And I have my senior lawyers in this room. If you go to the directive principles of state policy, the directive principles of state policy says that the directive principles of state policy contained in this chapter shall guide all citizens, Parliament, the President, the Judiciary, the Council of State, the Cabinet, political parties, and other bodies and persons in applying or interpreting this Constitution or any other law, and in taking and implementing any policy decision for the establishment of a just and free society. So the Directive Principles of State Policy has predetermined the ideology of Ghana. And if you read through the provisions on economic objectives and social objectives, you will find out that, in fact, we don't even need to be engaged in a debate about whether we are left or we are right, because the Constitution has defined an ideology for us. And clearly that ideology is centrism, which is that invest if you have to invest. Allow the private sector if you have to allow the private sector. But ultimately, do whatever it takes so that you can establish a just and free society in which people are enabled to benefit from governance. It is my considered opinion that since 1993, governments of different political traditions have come into office with strong convictions and clear mandates. For over 30 years now, power has alternated between the National Democratic Congress and the New Patriotic Party. And if you study their records in government, you will find something very interesting. Both parties, when they govern, end up governing from the center. The NDC, which traces its roots to a revolutionary tradition, has presided over market liberalization, private sector partnerships, and fiscal austerity when necessary. The NPP, which champions free enterprise, has expanded social protection programs, built public infrastructure, and intervened heavily in the economy when the situation demanded it. This is not hypocrisy. This is centrism in practice. This is what responsible governance looks like when you are no longer campaigning, but actually running a country with diverse needs, limited resources, and complex challenges. So the question we must confront is not whether centrism sounds attractive, but whether it can be used in addressing inequality, in managing our economy, in strengthening our institutions, and in restoring confidence in democratic leadership. In the Ghanaian context, I believe the answer lies first in our constitution. 1992 Constitution is not an ideological document. It does not belong to the left or the right. It is a carefully negotiated framework shaped by history, restraint, and hard experience. It disperses power, protects rights, and insists on accountability. That constitutional design is centrist in the most serious sense. And I read the Directive Principle of State Policy to you, and I challenge everybody that we are not allowed to either be left or right. If we seek to run this country under this constitution, we must all be in the center. That's what the constitution has dictated. That constitutional design is centrist in the most serious sense. It demands balance. It demands justification. It demands that power be exercised with reason rather than impulse. And that is what guides constitutional spirit. That is what guides constitutional spirit and should guide how we make policy. Centrist policy making does not begin with conclusions. It begins with questions. It asks what the evidence shows, what comparable societies have learned, and how proposed solutions will affect real people in real places, not in theory, but in practice. It requires the humility to revise policies that are not working, and the courage to say so publicly. So it requires the humility to revise policies that are not working and the courage to say so publicly. In politics, that is not easy, but governance is not a test of stubbornness, it is a test of results. True centrism has a backbone. That is why when you promise cocoa farmers, 70% of the cocoa price and world market price, slumps, and you are now earning only 2,000 and a little bit above 2,000 from the world market price. It is not stubbornness that should determine. It's pragmatism, reality, and centrism that should determine. You have to be honest with the people and tell them that you are not able to pay them that price because the world market price dictates that you should gain less than what we originally promised you. So that is what it is. It is prepared to redistribute when justice requires it. It is prepared to regulate when the public interest demands it. And it is prepared to liberalize when growth and innovation depends on it. What matters is not where a policy sits on an ideological spectrum, but whether it improves the lived reality of the Ghanaian people. 32 years into the Fourth Republic, Ghana is still defining itself, still negotiating the balance between liberty and order, growth and equity, ambition and restraint. That negotiation is democracy, and Parliament is where that negotiation takes institutional form. That is what this lecture series is about. It is Parliament saying to the people of Ghana, we want to think out loud with you. We want you to understand how we reason, how we decide, and we want to hear how you reason too. To our distinguished speaker for today, the Honorable Minority Leader, I say the floor is yours, and we look forward to your insights. Let us have a frank and deep conversation on how our policies are posited and how they affect our people. As law and policy makers, it is our duty to hold these types of conversations with the people whose mandate we have. And at the end of this day, let's leave here a little more equipped to build Ghana, the Ghana we all deserve. Thank you, and may God bless our homeland, Ghana.
Thank you to the majority leader, the Honorable Mahama Ayariga. I wish I had the power to ask whether or not the fantastic cocoa calculation was also part of the statement admitted. But I do not have that power, so I will not go there. Honorable members, distinguished guests, we also have with us the former member of Parliament for Yendi, Alhaji Dr. Farouk Aliu Mahama. I will recognize many more former MPs and other guests as and when they bring it to my attention. We'll take some short musical interlude. To do that, I invite the cultural performance by the Ebibi Groma group, a brief one. Thank you so much for that beautiful performance. We may have to investigate who conspired to get them to sing some of minority leaders' favorite songs. I know, but for the fact that he is the keynote speaker, he would have joined them on the dancing floor with his Agbaja dance. Thank you, Ebibi Groma Group, for that beautiful performance. Distinguished guests, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to another important part of the program. It is time to hear from the main speaker for today. But I do not consider myself worthy enough to introduce him. So I will call on a senior brother, a senior in Parliament, a young man who is the ranking member on Youth and Sports Committee. He's a member of the Economy and Development Committee. He was a member of the Education Committee in the 8th Parliament. He is the Member of Parliament for the Old Tafo constituency, the Honorable Lawyer Vincent Eko Asefua. And while he walks up here, let me also say that the Vincent you see today is because of the mentorship of the likes of Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempe. Thank you so much, Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempe, for mentoring this young man. Vincent, kindly introduce the main speaker.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Adam Agbana. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my singular honor and privilege to introduce to you a man whose name has become synonymous with strategic leadership, eloquence, and dedicated public service in Ghana's democratic journey. He is a legal luminary, an accomplished legislator, entrepreneur, and a strategic leader with over a decade of active engagement in parliamentary business, underpinned by an exceptional academic and legal foundation. Born on the 27th of May 1978, his educational journey began at STC Demonstration Primary and Junior High School, where he wrote his BEc in August 1994. He advanced to the prestigious St. Augustine's College, Cape Coast, where he completed his SSSC in December 1997. He then crossed continents to pursue law at the University of Buckingham in the United Kingdom, where he earned an LLB with management. Following this, he trained at the Ghana School of Law, obtaining his professional law certificate, and was subsequently called to the bar. To broaden his horizon, he pursued further studies in MA in International Politics and Security at the University of Bradford. He also pursued a postgraduate studies in leadership and governance at the prestigious Said Business School, University of Oxford. He was elected a member of Parliament for a Futu constituency in 2012 on the ticket of the New Patriotic Party. He has since served with distinction in parliamentary leadership, first as Deputy Majority Leader, then as Majority Leader in the 8th Parliament, and currently as Mighty Minority Leader. Within Parliament, he has been a key voice on influential committees such as Defense and Interior, Finance and Public Accounts. He currently serves as a ranking member on both the Appointment Committee and the Business Committee, where his legal acumen and rich parliamentary experience continue to shape national policy and governance. His distinguished public service includes serving as board chairman of the Ghana Water Company, the Road Fund, and the Electricity Company of Ghana. On the international stage, he currently serves as the 3rd Deputy Speaker at the ECOWAS Parliament, where he contributes to advancing regional cooperation, governance, and development. At the constituency level, he has championed the transformative policy known as the Futu Dream, a vision rooted in placing the people at the very heart of development. This people-centered agenda is guided by 4 core principles. 1, security for the people. 2, quality education for the people. 3, better healthcare delivery for the people. And last but not the least, private sector development. He was conferred with the traditional title by the Futu Traditional Council as the Osahene of the Futu Traditional Area, a recognition of his exemplary leadership, commitment to community development, and dedication to preserving the rich cultural heritage of the Futu people. Beyond politics, he is the head of chambers at Afenyo-Markin, Okuntu and Associates, with extensive expertise in financial crimes, security, human rights, and constitutional law. He is a successful entrepreneur, and above all, a servant leader whose dedication to public service is truly worth emulating. He is married to Mrs. Diane Afenyo-Markin. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me. Welcome Osahin Alexander Kwamena Afenyo-Markin, the leader of the mighty minority. Thank you so much.
Toboli, Nega Bajevielo, Toboli, Nega Blanyeji, Toboli, Nega Nyoanyeji, Toboli, Mega Favile Zamenamo, Mega Favile Zamenamo, Nalena Hopela Siona Blo, Devielo, Toboli. Mega Bajevielo, Toboli, Mega Bajevielo, Toboli, Nega Blanyeji, Toboli, Nega Nyoanyeji, Toboli, Mega Favile Zamenamo, Mega Favile Zamenamo, Nadena Hopela Siona Blo, Devielo, Toboli, Mega Favile Zamenamo, Mega Favile Zamenamo, Devielo, Toboli.
Thank you very much. Second Deputy Speaker and Chairman of this occasion, Majority Leader and Leader of Government Business, Clerk to Parliament, colleagues in leadership, our respected former senior colleague, Dr. Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, Head of Africa Prosperity Network, Mr. Gabi Asare-Ochridakun, colleague members of Parliament, representatives of other political parties, specifically present, as I can see, Deputy General Secretary of the MPP, Mrs. Tibudako, Directors of Parliament, members from the civic society, the media, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank the Clerk to Parliament for this initiative and for giving me the opportunity to do the needful as it made in lecture. Chairman, please permit me to make two important acknowledgements, as they are very essential because we have students in this auditorium. Back in 2012, as a young candidate in my constituency, it took the Director of Elections to train me and prepare me with his own manual on how to conduct my campaign and win election. I followed that tutorial notes as if he was a prophet. On the D-Day, the realities were that I had to go by the tutorial notes, and I won. Came to Parliament, he held my hand and never gave up on me, even in difficult times. And I'm honored that today, even in his tight schedule, he's here. Dr. Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, I'm grateful. And two, Gabi Asare-Ochridakun, who also never gave up on me as a young legislator and make sure I learned the rules on communication and studied hard
And he never hesitated to correct me, even when I got it wrong. I'm happy he's here. Not the least, our own student leader. He didn't promise me, but I heard that he will be here to listen to what his boy can do, Dr. Amin Adna. We were at Kivas together. We were his boys. And he's here. He calls me his leader. I call him my boss. Colleagues, thank you for having time to be part of this important program titled Centrism, Formulating Policies for a Growing Democracy. We are in a house of a giant. On the 7th of January 1993, Ghana held its breath. A nation wearied by decades of coup, proscription, and broken promises stood at the fragile edge of a new democratic dawn. The air was heavy with doubts. The wounds of history were still fresh. Many wondered whether this latest experiment in constitutional rule would endure, or whether it would falter under the weight of mistrust and memory. Into that chamber stepped Justice Daniel Francis Annan. He lifted the speaker's gavel with calm, deliberate resolve. Before him sat a house alive with tension, suspicion, and untested loyalties. Around him stood a country anxious yet hopeful. In that defining moment, he did not merely preside over proceedings, he steadied a republic. Today, I want to talk to you about centrism in the very auditorium named after him in his memory. I'm going to take you through what it is, where it comes from, and why it matters desperately for Ghana right now, and what happens to a nation when we abandon its principles in favor of extremes, slogans, and political theater. Let me thank the majority leader, Honorable Mahama Yarga, for doing the teaser. What he doesn't know is that I admire him so much. But also remind him that when the market dictates, the state must intervene. So the producer price of cocoa must never be reduced. The state should have intervened. Ladies and gentlemen, before we ascend to the heights of policy and philosophy, I need to bring you back down to earth. I need to introduce to you two women whose stories this nation has not yet found courage to truly hear. Somewhere in Ghana's north, in a village whose name you will not find on a tourist map, a girl was born. Let us call her by her rightful name, Fati. Fati grew up surrounded by the love that was rich and resources that were scarce. She watched her mother work the land. She watched her father dream of a better life. And somewhere in that red dusted courtyard, beneath a sky so wide and blue it hurt to look at, Fati made herself a quiet promise. I will go. I will find something better. I will make my family proud. And so, like thousands before her, Fati came to Accra. She came with a fire in her chest and hope in her hands. She believed, as our constitution promises, as our politicians swear at every rally, that Ghana is a land of opportunity. She believed the system would meet her halfway. It did not. Today, Fati is barely 17 years old, and already life has taken more than that it has given her. She works as a kitchen assistant, a destitute, hard-laboring hand in one of Accra's Wache kitchens. She wakes before the sun. She lifts and scrubs and carries and cleans in heat that will break a stronger spirit. She earns barely enough to survive. No safety net, no social protection, no pathway to a skill, a certificate, a life with dignity. And Fati is pregnant. Barely 17, carrying a new life in her womb. A child whose future she cannot afford to imagine, even as she refuses to stop praying for it. Is this a promise of our democracy? Is this what we meant when we said, quote, development in freedom? Hold Fati in your heart as we continue. Do not let her go. Because every policy we discuss today, every government we judge, we must judge it through her eyes. Now let me take you beyond our shores. For Ghana's pain does not stop at the water's edge. Picture a young Ghanaian mother. Her name, Faustina Yelifasiu. We know her story, not because we stood by her side, not because we witnessed her final moments, but because in some quiet, unspoken corner of our hearts, we all feared becoming her. She looked at this country. She looked at her daughter. She weighed the cost of staying against the terror of the sea, and she chose the sea. She stepped onto the rickety, overcrowded vessel in the cold darkness, and she prayed that the Mediterranean would be merciful. It was not. The boat capsized. The cold water swallowed her whole. In a final moment, perhaps she thought of Ghana. Perhaps she thought of a little child. Perhaps she whispered a prayer that had no time to finish. She left behind her daughter, barely 4 years old, clinging to the wreckage in the great sea, rescued by strangers. Her photograph circled the globe as thousands searched desperately for her family, her roots, and her home. To this day, I do not know if that child has been found. She drifts in some limbo between tragedy and testimony as a haunting question to every leader, every lawmaker, every citizen of this republic. What must we build so that no Ghanaian mother ever again feels that the sea is safer than her own country? These two women, Fati and the nameless mother in the Mediterranean, are not statistics. They are the heartbeat of why we are here today. They are why centrism is not merely a political philosophy. It is a moral imperative. This afternoon, I am particularly heartened by the diversity of this audience that are here to listen to me. Civic activists, students, parliamentarians, community voices, and everyday Ghanaian who represent the very heartbeat of our democracy. This is a deliberate national conversation designed to demystify the inner workings of Parliament, a sacred space where the will of the people is translated into laws that shape our shared future. The democracy we face, ladies and gentlemen, colleague members of Parliament, at a time when political discourse across the globe is increasingly defined by polarization, mistrust, and ideological rigidity, the call to reflect seriously on the role of the political center is both intellectually and politically urgent. Democracies today are not collapsing primarily because of external invasion. They are fraying from within. The tone of public debate has hardened. Compromise is calculated as betrayal. Moderation is misrepresented as weakness. Yet history teaches us that durable democratic progress has seldom been the product of extremes. It has more often been the achievement of those who could build bridges across differences. Every growing democracy eventually reaches a defining moment. The question shifts from whether democracy can survive to whether democracy can deliver. Our journey as a country. Ghana's Fourth Republic, established in 1992, has experienced consistent democratic governance marked by stability, constitutionalism, and institutional continuity. As we have been told already by the majority leader, power has alternated peacefully between the New Patriotic Party and the National Democratic Congress. Institutions have strengthened. Parliamentary oversight has deepened. Judicial independence has been tested and upheld. What is particularly instructive is that successive governments, regardless of party, have often found centrist ground on critical issues. We have pursued macroeconomic stability, fiscal discipline, inflation control, and debt sustainability when evidence demanded it, even when such policies were politically difficult. We have combined market-based economic management with social intervention programs. Private sector growth has been encouraged alongside significant public investment in education, health, and infrastructure. Fiscal discipline has coexisted with targeted support for vulnerable populations. These policy choices demonstrate that Ghana's democratic governance has not been driven by ideological extremes. Policy formulation has largely been guided by moderation, pragmatism, and national consensus. Now let's turn to the internal landscape, the center-left and the center-right. Indeed, Ghana's democratic governance is shaped by two prominent political ideologies, the center-left and the center-right. Each ideology represents a coherent philosophical and political framework that informs party policies, governance priorities, and national debates. The center-left in Ghana is associated with the National Democratic Congress. This NDC traces its origins to the era of Armed Forces Revolutionary Council and the subsequent Provisional National Defense Council led by Jerry John Rawlings in the early 80s. This political ideology emphasizes social justice, equity, and the role of the state in addressing inequalities. It advocates for an active government that invests in public services, promotes inclusive development, redistribute income through progressive policies, protect workers and consumers through regulation, and ensure that the benefits of economic growth are broadly shared. The New Patriotic Party, the MPP, of which I'm proudly a member, on the other hand, traces its ideological foundation from the Dankwa Dombo Buzia tradition. The center-right in Ghana is associated with this political tradition. This political philosophy encapsulates individual liberty, private enterprise, limited government intervention, market-driven solutions. It prioritizes personal responsibility, protection of property rights, and economic efficiency, advocating for policies that encourage entrepreneurship, attract investment, and promote sustainable growth. Now let us try and understand centrism, its history, meaning, and foundations. The historical origins of centrism trace its roots to a familiar center-right ideological spectrum in modern origins to sitting arrangement of the French National Assembly in 1789. Those who supported the monarchy sat to the right of the presiding officer. Those who favored radical reform sat to the left. From this historical accident grew one of the most durable organizing framework in modern politics. The left, broadly speaking, has historically championed equality, collective welfare, state intervention, and protection of marginalized groups. The right has historically prioritized individual liberty, free markets, tradition, and limited government. Centrism emerged from the lived experience of societies that grappled with ideological extremes. History shows that rigid adherence to any single political doctrine often produced unintended consequences. Excessive state-stifled initiative and efficiency, while unchecked market dominance, deepen inequality and social exclusion. Over time, democratic systems learn that governance requires balance. Centrism, therefore, developed as a practical response to these lessons. It draws from multiple traditions, selected policies not because they fit a rigid ideological mold, but because they address real challenges effectively. Centrism is grounded in realism. It accepts complexity. It recognizes that society evolves and policies must evolve with them. Centrism is not the arithmetic midpoint between left and right. It is a distinct political tradition with its own philosophical commitments, its own internal debate, and its own evolving relationship with power. It draws selectively from both the left and the right, rejecting what it regards as the excesses of each, while synthesizing the most defensible element of both. Authentic centrism is anchored in three foundational pillars. The first is balance. This is a recognition of the competing values: liberty, equality, efficiency, fairness, individual rights, and collective responsibilities, and that they must be held in tension rather than resolved by the triumph of one over the other. As Aristotle taught in his concept of the, quote, golden mean, end quote, virtues lies not in excess but in equilibrium. The second pillar is evidence. Centrism grounds public policy in research, data, and measurable outcomes rather than ideological loyalty. Centrist policy makers ask not, does this fit my doctrine? But they ask, what works best in this context at this time for the greatest number of people? Third, the pillar is inclusion. Centrism ensures that diverse voices shape the national conversation and that solutions expand the circle of benefit rather than reward one group at the expense of another. Centrism is disciplined governance. It is intellectual humility to recognize that no single political tradition possesses a monopoly on wisdom. It is a moral resolve to place national interest above partisan gain. Extremes may excite, but balance builds a nation. What unites the center left and the center right, Honorable Chairman, I beg to submit, despite these differences, is a shared commitment to constitutional rule, electoral legitimacy, the rejection of political violence, the protection of civil liberties, and the defense of pluralism. It is the shared foundation, more than any specific position, that defines the centrist tradition and distinguishes it from the illiberal extremes on both sides. As third Deputy Speaker of ECOWAS Parliament, I have seen firsthand the consequences when these shared commitments erode. In part of West Africa, unconstitutional changes of government have disrupted democratic trajectories. Military interventions, often justified as corrective measures, ultimately undermine long-term institutional development. The center must therefore serve as the guardian of constitutional continuity. I must submit that the center left and the center right have their limits as ideologies. While ideology offers guidance, rigid adherence to it can become a constraint, especially in a growing democracy. Societies are complex. Economic conditions change. Social needs evolve. External shocks such as global economic downturns, public health crisis, or supply chain disruptions demand flexible responses. In such circumstances, policies driven purely by ideological loyalty risk becoming disconnected from reality. A center-left approach, if pursued without moderation, may place unsustainable pressure on public finances. A center-right approach, if applied rigidly, may widen inequality or weaken social cohesion. This is where the limits of ideology become apparent. Effective policy making requires more than philosophical consistency. It requires judgment, balance, and responsiveness to contexts. Why centrism matter in Ghana? Honorable Chairman, colleagues in leadership, members of Parliament here present, ladies and gentlemen, I submit that as a growing democracy, the stakes could not be higher. We face complex challenges: youth unemployment, climate vulnerability, digital transformation, ECOWAS integration, and global economic volatility. No single ideology holds all the solutions. Centrism encourages innovation. It blends market incentives with social investment, private initiative with public oversight, growth with equity. A growing democracy like ours must guard against two dangers. The first is ideological rigidity, which paralyzes decision making. The second is opportunistic populism, which sacrifices long-term national interests for short-term applause. Centrism charts a disciplined course between these two extremes. Now, the role of Parliament in a centrist policy-making democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, in every constitutional democracy influenced by the Westminster tradition like ours, Parliament occupies a unique space. It is where competing visions are debated, contested, refined, and ultimately synthesized into law. Parliament plays a central role in translating centrist principles into policy outcomes. Through committee work, debates, and oversight, Parliament ensures that legislation reflects a broad range of perspectives. Committees examine evidence, hear from experts, and engage the stakeholders. This process naturally moderates extreme positions and promotes balanced solutions. Lawmaking becomes an exercise in consensus building rather than ideological confrontation. Oversight, when conducted responsibly, strengthens governance without undermining it. This is a hallmark of centrist democratic practice. Now let's turn to centrism and policy formulation, the centrist approach to policy making. Centrist policy making begins with a rejection of ideological determinism. Rather than deriving policy prescription from first principles and applying them uniformly regarding of context, centrist policymakers approach each challenge empirically. They ask what the evidence shows, what has worked in comparative contexts, what the likely trade-offs are, and how different groups of citizens will be affected. This empirical orientation is one of centrism's genuine strengths, and it has produced some of the most durable and effective policy innovations of the modern era. The mixed economy model and that defined much of post-war development, combining market mechanisms with state investment and regulation, was not an accident. It was a result of deliberate centrist negotiation between labor and capital, between growth and equity, and between efficiency and justice. Now let me turn to economic policy under centrism. In economic policy, centrism embraces the mixed economy model. Centrist governments have been associated with macroeconomic stability, prudent fiscal management, investment in human capital through education and healthcare, and the construction of social safety nets. These nets protect citizens from the worst consequences of economic disruption without creating disincentives to work and enterprise. A centrist economic response requires three commitments. The first is macroeconomic stability. This means inflation control, prudent borrowing aligned with productivity, and transparent fiscal management. The center-right tradition insists that sustainable social policy must be built on sustainable economic foundations. Deficit finance without discipline eventually punish the very citizen they aim to protect. The second commitment is growth with inclusion. This requires investment in education, digital infrastructure, agriculture modernization, and industrialization. At the same time, centrism recognizes that market alone cannot address structural inequality. Investment in human capital through free senior higher education, technical training, healthcare expansion are not acts of charity. They are strategic investment in national productivity. The third commitment is social protection. This means targeted intervention for the most vulnerable, ensuring that reform does not disproportionately burden the poor. Now let me turn to the social policy. In social policy, centrism has generally sought to expand access to education, healthcare, and social protection, while maintaining fiscal sustainability of these systems. Centrist governments have often been the architect of universal healthcare systems, public pension schemes, and compulsory education frameworks. These frameworks have transformed the life chances of millions. At the same time, centrist social policy must confront its limitations. It has sometimes been criticized for moving too slowly on questions of structural inequality, for prioritizing administrative efficiency over genuine transformation, and for failing to adequately address the systemic barriers faced by marginalized communities. These are serious charges that require honest engagement. Now let me turn to our beloved Constitution and the architecture of centrism. Again, I thank the majority leader for a good teaser on the relevant portions of the Constitution. Honorable Chairman, if we are to speak seriously about centrism as a governing philosophy for Ghana, we must look not only at party manifestos and political traditions, we must look at the 1992 Constitution itself. Because whether we have fully recognized it or not, Ghana's Constitution is structurally centrist. It does not adopt ideological extremes. It does not entrench rigid economic dogma. It does not privilege class struggle over liberty, nor liberty over social justice. Instead, it deliberately and carefully balances competing values, holding them in creative tension, refusing to let either side of the equation swallow the other. Let us begin where the Constitution begins. The preamble itself, where the moral architecture of this republic is set. It says, the people of Ghana, they declare that we establish this constitution to secure, quote, the blessings of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity, unquote. Not liberty alone, not equality alone, not prosperity alone, liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity all together. So from this, it is obvious that the framers understood that each of these values, pursued in isolation, collapses in its own tyranny. Liberty without equality of opportunity breeds exclusion, where freedom exists on paper but belongs in practice only to the already privileged. Equality without liberty breeds repression, the suffocating sameness of the authoritarian state. And prosperity without justice breeds the instability that has torn nations apart, where a few grow fabulously wealthy while the many, like Fatih in a Wache kitchen, are left wondering whether this republic was ever truly meant for them. The Constitution does not choose between these values. It harmonizes them. And that harmonization is the constitutional definition of centrism. I so submit. Second Deputy Speaker Chair, the preamble further commits the Republic to the following: freedom, justice, probity, and accountability. Freedom speaks to liberal democracy. Justice speaks to social fairness. Probity and accountability speak to institutional restraint. Together, these four principles constitute a constitutional rejection of authoritarianism, populism, and unregulated power in any of its forms. So now let's turn to chapter 6 proper, the directive principles of state policy. Article 35 so declares, quote, that Ghana shall be a democratic state dedicated to the realization of freedom and justice. Again, freedom and justice held together, neither permitted to crowd out the other. Note the language used in that phraseology. Article 36, 1, mandate the state to manage the economy to secure, quote, maximum welfare, freedom, and happiness, end quote. And then it does something constitutionally critical. It recognizes private enterprise, but it also requires that the economy function within the framework of national policy, that the market serves the nation rather than consuming it. The Constitution rejects both economic absolutism and state domination in a single breath. Market, yes. Planning, yes. Private property, yes. Social obligation, yes. And in Article 36(8), it declares that the right to own property carries a social obligation to serve the larger community. Property is not merely personal possession. It is a social instrument. This is not socialism. It is not a laissez-faire capitalism. It is constitutional moderation. Then Article 37 anchors Ghana's social order in, quote, freedom, equality, justice, probity, and accountability, and expressly links these values to the fundamental human rights enshrined in chapter 5 of the Constitution. This is no accident of drafting at all, ladies and gentlemen, listening to me. It is a deliberate constitutional architecture. The same moral vocabulary that animates the preamble is carried forward into the directive principles of state policy. But we must also be clear about what the Constitution does and does not. The Constitution makes promises, and in other areas it is silent. So we say that which it has not promised. It does not guarantee uniform outcomes, by the way. It does not impose artificial sameness. What it demands is something both more modest and more profound. Equality before the law and equality of opportunity. It requires the state to create conditions in which every Ghanaian, regardless of birth, background, or belief, has a real and fair chance to pursue a life of dignity. What it demands is something. What that means is that there is a constitutional commitment, not enforced uniformity, but a structured fairness, not leveling down, but opening doors. This is a constitutional promise we betray every day that fatigue carries burden in a wache kitchen with no pathway out. So when critics ask whether centrism is foreign to Ghana's political culture, the answer, the resounding constitutional answer, which I beg in all humility but with firmness of mind to submit, is a big no. Because centrism is not foreign to Ghana. Centrism is written into Ghana's constitutional DNA. Our challenge is not to invent centrism. Our challenge is to opportunize what the Constitution already envisions: a democratic state that balances liberty and justice, a market system that serves the common good, a republic where Fatih's child has a much right to a future as the child of any minister, member of parliament, or judge in this land. That is not partisan philosophy. That is constitutional philosophy. And it is the only blueprint, I emphasize, the only blueprint worthy of growing a democracy. Now let me bring in Parliament, the NDPC, and the institutional guardians of centrism. Honorable Chair, a constitution that proclaims values without institutions to enforce them is little more than beautiful words on parchment. The framers understood this, and so they built the institutional machinery to translate centrist values into centrist governance. Two institutions above all others carry the responsibility: Parliament and the National Development Planning Commission. As you may be well aware, under Article 93(2) of the Constitution, legislative power of Ghana is vested in Parliament. Parliament is the institutional channel through which the sovereign will of the people is translated into law. But consider how Parliament is designed to do its work. Article 106 prescribes structured procedure for lawmaking: readings, committees, debates, deliberations, and measured consideration. These safeguards are not bureaucratic formalities, I beg to submit. They are constitutional brakes against extremism. The Constitution envisages that a day will come that there will be a mighty minority of 87. They are constitutional brakes against extremism. They force the majority to slow down. There are times that I see the majority leader slowing down to accommodate us. They compel the powerful to listen. They require that before any law binds the people of Ghana, it must survive the scrutiny of argument and the discipline of transparent process. Consultation, compromise, and deliberation are not weaknesses in our parliamentary system. They are its centrist genius. Article 103 further empowers Parliament to establish committees to scrutinize policy proposals, refine them, and align them with national priorities. Parliament's duty, therefore, is not merely to pass laws. It is to ensure that every law passed, every budget approved, every executive action endorsed reflects the constitutional principle of balance, liberty with justice, market with social responsibility, and power with accountability. And yet, if we are honest, how often does Parliament perform this function with the rigor the Constitution demands? How often do we approve budgets not honestly assessed against our developmental objectives? How often does a majority use its numbers not to govern better, but simply to govern faster, bypassing the very deliberative safeguards the Constitution put in place to protect the people from excesses of power? I say this not merely as a critique of any one administration. I say it as a challenge to Parliament as an institution and to myself as a leader of a caucus. We must do better. Because when Parliament fails to be the centrist conscience of the Republic itself drifts towards extremes. Having laid this constitutional framework for Parliament, the legislature, for policy formulation, I now submit that it is precisely to harmonize national objectives into coherent long-term strategy that the same Constitution and Article 86 and 87 established the National Development Planning Commission. It mandated to transcend electoral cycles, harmonize sectoral objectives, and translate the directive principles of state policy into coordinated development strategy. Yet, it is my respectful submission that the NDPC has not fully realized this mandate. Concerns regarding its composition and perceived political character have limited its ability to command broad and enduring cross-party confidence. As a result, therefore, national planning has too often been episodic, one step forward, one step backward, rather than sustain national progression. Policies advance under one administration only to stall or shift under another. This cycle weakens investor confidence, disrupts policy continuity, and constrains sustained growth. If Ghana is to break this pattern, the architecture of national planning must inspire legitimacy across political traditions. A planning institution grounded in expertise rather than political alignment will provide a stable framework within which both center-left and center-right governments can pursue their preferred instruments while adhering to a shared long-term direction. Democracy must permit alternation of power. It must not permit alternation of national purpose and direction. If our democracy is to reach greater maturity than both the center-right and center-left traditions, then it must operate within a stable constitutional development framework. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit that as a country, we need a structural imperative, re-engineering of the National Development Planning body, the Commission. If Ghana's development challenge is characterized by policy discontinuity with each electoral transition, then the remedy cannot be partisan victory alone. It must be institutional design. Although the framers of the Constitution established the NDPC as the constitutional anchor of long-term national planning, in practice, the Commission has not fully insulated national planning from political alternation. If we are serious about sustainable development, then incremental adjustment will not suffice. Structural reform is required. Therefore, I propose 5 interlocking reforms in this lecture. 1. Reconstituting the NDPC around technical competence. The credibility of a planning institution rests first on its composition. At present, perceptions of political alignment undermine confidence in the NDPC's neutrality. A structured commission should prioritize technical expertise across critical domains: macroeconomics, public finance, infrastructure engineering, education policy, agricultural transformation, digital systems, environmental sustainability, and industrial strategy. Representation should be competence-driven rather than politically symbolic. This is not to exclude democratic oversight. It is to ensure that national planning is guided by evidence, modeling, and long-term projections rather than short-term partisan incentives. When planning authority rests on professional credibility, continuity becomes intellectually defensible rather than politically imposed. Second, supermajority parliamentary confirmation of key appointments. I submit that to strengthen legitimacy, appointment to the NDPC, particularly its chair and core technical members, should require supermajority approval in Parliament. A 2/3 confirmation threshold would: 1. Encourage bipartisan consultation before nomination, reduce overt partisan capture, and again signal that national planning belongs to the Republic, not a party. Such a mechanism would elevate the Commission's authority and shield it from being perceived as an extension of the executive. 3. Binding medium to long-term developmental frameworks. Ghana's development framework should carry structured continuity obligations. This does not mean future governments cannot innovate. It means they must justify deviation transparently within an agreed long-term architecture. Development requires time, and time requires stability for development to manifest. A constitutionally backed 15 to 25-year national development framework, reviewed periodically but not discarded wholesale, will ensure the following: 1. Industrial policies mature before evaluation. Infrastructure sequencing follows coherent logic. And finally, fiscal anchors are not politically recalibrated at every transition. 4. Fiscal responsibility embedded within development planning. One of the recurrent disruptions in Ghana's developmental trajectory has been macroeconomic instability. Planning cannot be divorced from fiscal realism. The NDPC framework should integrate binding fiscal rule, debt sustainability threshold, expenditure discipline parameters, and medium-term revenue mobilization strategies into development architecture. This ensures that ambition is matched by affordability. Redistributive commitment without fiscal anchors creates inflationary pressures. Industrial ambition without debt discipline creates vulnerability. Therefore, development planning must internalize macroeconomic constraints from inception. 5. Institutionalization of policy impact evaluation and continuity audits. I submit further that a reformed NDPC must not merely design plans, it must evaluate them rigorously. Independent policy impact assessment should be mandatory at defined intervals. When administrations change, structured continuity audit should assess which projects are: 1. Near completion, 2. Economically viable, and 3. Strategically essential to national development. Projects that meet objective criteria should continue irrespective of political origin. This should operationalize Article 35 directive regarding continuity of public projects and project national investment from partisan resets. Elections should determine leadership and policy instruments, not reset national progress every 4 or 8 years. The Constitution already provides the philosophical center. What Ghana requires is institutional architecture capable of preserving strategic coherence within that center. If we fail to reform our planning institutions, ideological contestation will continue to produce policy oscillation. If we succeed, center-left or center-right government alike will operate within a stable national framework, differing in ideology, but united in the trajectory of sustainable national development. 6. Reversing the planning hierarchy from manifesto-driven governance to constitutionally anchored development. On this point, I submit that perhaps is the most critical reform required in terms of conceptualizing rather than being procedural. Ghana must shift from manifesto-driven governance to constitutionally anchored development. In mature democracies, national development strategy precedes partisan programming. Political parties compete on how best to advance an agreed national framework, not on replacing that framework wholesale. For too long, electoral manifestos in Ghana have effectively functioned as the primary blueprint of national direction. With each transition of power, new campaign commitments reshape priorities, resequence projects, and recalibrate policy focus. Political parties, whether center-left or center-right, ought to derive their manifestos from an agreed national development framework outlined by the NDPC. Their ideologies should shape how to advance the plan and not to redefine the strategic direction itself. The logical order should be Constitution, National Development Plan, Party Manifesto, and policy implementation. Yet, in practice, the hierarchy has often been inverted. Party manifestos have become the primary blueprint of national development. Manifestos have driven national planning rather than being guided by it. Development plans are recalibrated to align with electoral promises rather than electoral promises being structured within long-term constitutional priorities. The result is policy discontinuity, unsustainable development, and weakened institutional credibility. When development is manifesto-driven, it becomes cyclical. When it is constitutionally anchored, it becomes cumulative. Restoring the proper hierarchy would discipline manifesto formulation, stabilize investor expectations, protect ongoing national projects, and elevate electoral competition from populist bidding to strategic refinement. Parties will compete on competence and execution within a shared national trajectory. The Constitution consigns all political traditions to the democratic center. It does not license each electoral victor to redefine the republic's development trajectory from inception. In short, I submit that national development must guide politics. Politics must not perpetually redefine development. Now, our generation is at crossroads as a result of our inactions. I want you to feel the weight of these numbers, not as statistics, but as lives. 7 out of every 10 unemployed Ghanaian persons in Ghana are young people. 30% of 15 to 24-year-olds who want to work cannot find work. 1.3 million young Ghanaians not learning, not earning, not building, just waiting. Project that forward 30 years. Imagine cohort after cohort of young Ghanaians entering adulthood with no skill. The modern economy, with no skill that the modern economy can absorb. No factory, no job in their district, no vocational pathway out of the informal sector's grip. What does that Ghana look like? Let's reflect on this. It looks like a country where frustration hardens into fury, where idle and educated youth become easy recruits for crime, for extremism, for demagogues who promise revolution and deliver only chaos. It looks like a parliament spending every session managing crisis that could have been prevented by the investment we refuse to make. And it looks like a Mediterranean story becoming normal, because when young people believe their country has no use for them, they will find a country that does, or they will die trying. A centrist, a center-right vision for youth employment says, building production, not dependency. Create the industrial ecosystem that absorbs young people into decent work. Invest in human capital through free SHS, TVET, and digital skills. Provide a safety net that prevents temporary shocks from becoming permanent disasters. That trinity, production, human capital, protection, is not left wing. It is not right wing. It is what works. And it is what we must return to. Imagine a Ghana without free SHS. If you want to see Ghana 30 years from now, do not start with oil fields or skyscrapers. Start with a classroom. In fact, more precisely, start without it at all. Before free SHS, cost alone locked hundreds of thousands of teenagers out of secondary education. For countless families, the choice was brutal. Fees or food, school or survival. Free SHS broke that wall. It was not perfect, but it worked. Enrollment surged. Children who would have gone straight into the labor market stayed in school. Education is the greatest equalizer human civilization has ever invented. Picture Ghana in 2056 without it. Millions of young people emerging into the knowledge economy, utterly unprepared. Islands of high-end jobs for the privileged, surrounded by seas of precarious, low-dignity work. Streets where the legitimate frustration of the unloved becomes the fuel of the unstable. And the Mediterranean full of dead bodies of our daughters and sons. Because when the state cannot offer its youth a fair shot, it ceases in their eyes to deserve their loyalty. That is not the cost of short-termism. That is the cost of short-termism in education policy. Free SHS must be protected. It must be reformed. It must be resourced. It must be deepened into genuine pathways of skill and development to create employment, so that the girl who passes through the door does not merely have a certificate, but a future. Now let me turn to our rivers and address Galamsey as an emergency. There is crisis. Quite literally, people, citizens, are poisoning our future. Ghana's rivers are dying. Up to 60% of our major water bodies are classified as polluted, many contaminated with mercury and arsenic from illegal mining operations, so pervasive and so politically protected that they have penetrated every legally protected forest reserves. This is a national security story, a water security story, a public health story. When a family can no longer drink from the river that has sustained them for generations, that is a community dying in slow motion while those responsible go unpunished. A genuine centrist strategy proceeds in 3 steps, and I beg to submit. 1, stop the harm first. That is absolute prohibition on mining in river channels and protected reserves, with special court and non-negotiable minimum sentences targeting the financiers and politically connected syndicates, not just desperate diggers. Stabilize the system. And second, ensure that buffer zones, closure of illegal washing plants, reclamation bonds, and real alternative livelihood for affected families. Heal with evidence, not theatrics. And third, remediation technologies deployed only after upstream pollution is demonstrably halted, following independent peer review and transparent cost-benefit analysis. We cannot pursue the policy on the frontiers of centrism without talking about AI. On my final point, let me proceed as I bring down the curtain on this lecture to address you on AI. Even as I've catalogued these failures, I want to turn your eyes towards a horizon of extraordinary possibility. There is a force reshaping the world right now as consequential as the Industrial Revolution, as transformative as the internet, and it offers Ghana a chance to leapfrog decades of developmental delay if we are bold enough, wise enough, and centrist enough to harness it. The force is artificial intelligence. Let me be direct, ladies and gentlemen. AI is not the preserve of Silicon Valley or Shanghai. Deployed deliberately and equitably, it is precisely the instrument a centrist development state can use to close the gap between the Ghana we have and the Ghana our constitution envisions. Think about what AI can do for Fatih's world. AI-powered agriculture platforms can give the smallholder farmer in Ghana's north access to real-time soil analysis, weather prediction, market pricing, and crop advisory that were previously available only to large commercial operations. That is the equality of opportunity our constitution promises, delivered through technology. Think about what AI can do for our health system. Clinical decision support tools can help a nurse in a district hospital in Wa or Hohoi make better diagnostic decision when no specialist is within 100-kilometer range. Predictive analytics can tell the health ministry where the next outbreak is likely to emerge before it overwhelms a world. This is not fantasy. It is already happening in comparable developing countries that choose to invest strategically. Think about what AI can do for our fight against galamsey and financial crime. Satellite imagery analyzed by machine learning can detect illegal mining in real time, mapping incursions into protected forest reserves faster than any ground patrol. An AI-powered detection system can identify patterns of digital fraud at a scale no human investigative unit can match, protecting both our citizens and Ghana's reputation as a destination for legitimate commerce. Think about what AI can do for Parliament and the NDPC. AI tools can help legislators analyze the developmental impact of proposed legislation before it is passed. They can help the NDPC model long-term consequences of policy choices across different scenarios, grounding Ghana's developmental planning in evidence rather than political instinct. They can help citizens track how their MPs vote, how budgets are spent, and whether programs are actually reaching the people they were designed to serve. Honorable Chair, Majority Leader, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, but here is the centrist caveat. It is critical, you know this. AI is not ideologically neutral in its effects. Deployed without the guardrails, it concentrates wealth, eliminates low-skilled jobs, and deepens inequality. A purely laissez-faire approach will produce a Ghana where the digital divide becomes developmental chasm. A purely statist approach will stifle innovation and fall behind the global frontier. The centrist path is different. Ghana must invest in the public infrastructure of AI. The connectivity, the digital literacy, which was discussed yesterday that was ignored, the data governance framework, and the regulatory system that allow AI to be a tool of inclusion rather than exclusion. Partner private sector innovation with a state obligation to equity so that benefit of AI reach the classroom in Bunkrugu as well as the boardroom in the airport city. Train our young people, including those like Fatih, who never imagined themselves as technology workers, in the digital skill that will define the next economy. This is Ghana's opportunity. Not to be a passive recipient of AI tools designed elsewhere for contexts very different from ours, but to be an active architect of an AI-enabled development model that reflects our constitutional values, balanced, inclusive, accountable, and free. Let me close from where I began with Fatih. Fatih is barely 17 years. She carries a new life in her body and an old burden on her back. She did not create a system that failed her. I said Fatih, not Fataya. Fataya, don't be sad. You are Fataya. You have embraced opportunity and you've made it and a model for the young girls. Fataya of Savelugu. Fatih did not create the system that failed her. She did not design the economy that left her without skills. She did not vote for the government that promised her a future and developed a wache kitchen for her. Fatih is not a symbol. She's a person, a citizen, a daughter of this republic. And the question this parliament, this democracy must answer is not abstract. It is very simple, very urgent, and very human. What are we prepared to do right now to make this republic worthy of Fatih? Are we prepared to defend free SHS so that her child is not denied what we deny her today? Are we prepared to rebuild industrial policy so that a factory can absorb her skill and pay her a living wage? Are we prepared to build a social protection system so that a pregnancy at 17 does not sentence her to destitution? Are we prepared to clean the rivers, equip our hospitals, secure our recruitment centers, feed our people, and harness AI so that the Ghana her child inherits is not diminished shadow of what it could be? Are we prepared to vote Parliament into the centrist conscience of the Constitution, the very conscience that the Constitution has always intended and seeks to protect, and to give the NDPC the authority it needs to hold our long-term national vision steady across every change of government? If we are, then centrism is our path. Not the centrism of the spineless or the uncommitted, but the bold, principled, practical. I mean humane centrism. I believe Ghana can find its way to that future. I believe this democracy, battered as it sometimes is, imperfect and as it is always, has within it the moral resources and institutional capacity to rise to this challenge. I believe that the young people in this room are the agents of that rising. Those national service personnel who don't know what the future holds for them. Believe in this country. There's an opportunity ahead. But that belief is not enough. Belief without action from us, your leaders, is not a beautiful thought dying in a comfortable chair. So when you walk out of this auditorium this evening, take a commitment. A commitment to demand from us not just promises but performance. Not just vision but values. Not just eloquence but evidence that policies actually improve the lives of the likes of Fati. A commitment to hold this parliament accountable, to watch how your MPs vote, to attend constituency meetings, to question, challenge, and participate. Democracy is not a spectator. It requires your presence, my dear youth. A commitment to defend freedom, because the rights that patriots like J.B. Dankwa died for are only secure as long as citizens are willing to defend them. Let it be written in the spirit of development in freedom, and let it be written with Fati in mind. Let it be written with centrist conviction that the growth and dignity are not enemies, that you can build an economy and protect a person, balance a budget and lift the vulnerable, be pro-market and pro-people, disciplined and compassionate, practical and disciplined, and that you can harness the most powerful technologies in human history, not to widen the gulf between the fortunate and the forgotten, but to finally and irrevocably close it. Ghana's Fourth Republic has not been an ideological vacuum. It has been a contest of traditions, center-left and center-right, each claiming fidelity to justice, opportunity, and national progress. Yet, as we have seen, the Constitution already defines the moral and developmental center within which this contest must occur. It commits the Republic to liberty, equality of opportunity, accountable governance, and sustainable prosperity for both present and future generations. The question, therefore, is not whether ideology matters. It does. Ideology shapes the policies that find expression in a party's manifesto and the programs that party implement when it's in government. Yet, when the most coherent ideology cannot substitute for institutional robustness, Without structural continuity in national planning, progress sustains vulnerable to electoral alternation. Development becomes cyclical rather than cumulative, and our republic risks mistaking motion for momentum. The deeper lesson, therefore, I beg to submit, is institutional maturity. Ghana must move from personality-driven policy to architecture-driven development. We must build systems that outlive administration, frameworks that discipline ambition, and institutions that harmonize ideological difference within constitutional purpose. If we succeed, ideological competition will refine policy rather than reset direction. Center-left and center-right government will debate instruments while preserving trajectory. Citizens will experience continuity rather than volatility. Investors will respond to predictability rather than uncertainty. And national progress will become incremental, cumulative, and irreversible. The ultimate test of a democracy is how wisely it manages continuity. Ghana stands at a moment where institutional reform, disciplined governance, and constitutional fidelity can transform ideological philosophies into permanent and sustainable policy outcomes. The choice before us is not between center-left and center-right in abstraction. It is between short-term advancement and sustained transformation. May we choose sustainable development over short-term advancement, stability over volatility, productivity over populism, and constitutional purpose over partisan convenience. For in the final analysis, the republic and its democracy will not be judged by the eloquence of its center-left or center-right ideological claims, but by the durability of development. Democracy must deliver. It must expand freedoms. It must widen opportunity. It must generate sustainable prosperity. And it must do so not only for the present generation, but for posterity. That is a test of a responsible governance. That is the challenge of our time. And that is the unfinished work Ghana's democratic project looks up to. Thank you very much for your kind audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, our distinguished minority leader. The Gen Zs will say, please, honorable members, please don't leave. The second deputy speaker will give a brief closing remark. So please don't leave. Honorable members, you are reminded that pursuant to Article 67 of our Constitution, the President of the Republic will be in Parliament tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. to present the State of the Nation's address. Before we take the closing prayer, we'll humbly invite the second Deputy Speaker of Parliament to give us his closing remarks as the chairperson for this occasion.
Thank you, Honorable Edem Abedna. Let me begin by thanking the Clerk to Parliament and Public Affairs Department for eventually beginning this series of public lectures to deepen further the relationship between Parliament and the public. Since the A Parliament, the Speaker and the leadership of Parliament has made it a point that indeed Parliament belongs to the public, and therefore nothing must be done here that should be hidden from the public. And as such, 3 departments has been created just to enhance our relationship with the public. We have a Department of Public Engagement, we have Media Relations, and we have the Department of Broadcasting. These 3 departments have been created, as I said, so that Parliament can be made known to the public. I believe if you've been monitoring Parliament for some time now, almost every day, at least we get about 3 sets of schools coming across the country, from Upper West region, from Upper East region, from Northern region, from Volta, Uti, from Ashanti, from Brown Ahafo, from Western, Northwestern region, coming to Parliament to witness what actually goes on. Again, we have established the Citizen Bureau, whereby nothing in Parliament will be hidden from the public. Once you want to get any information, you write to us, we will give you the information. In effect, all what we are trying to do is to make sure that Parliament, more or less the parliamentarians, all of us, we were elected by you, the public. So why should we be hiding ourselves? So that is the policy of Parliament now. We are making it open. Now our plenary sessions are open. You can view it right from the beginning to the end. It used to be that only Public Accounts Committee and Appointment Committee were the only committees that we were viewing to the public by way of televising it live. Now most of the committees are also televising it live. So in effect, we are making Parliament a public institution. So therefore, today we have begun this wonderful lecture, and our lecturer, Afenyo-Markin, has begun this public series lecture. I hope in no time we are going to have the 2nd and the 3rd and the 4th, and the public will be invited. I think as many as you turn up today, which has made today a beautiful day, you will not shine away from the series of lectures that we are going to have. Today's topic, Centrism, is a very philosophical topic. My understanding is to do away with extremism and try to be liberal in democracy, seek for social justice, and work for mass economic freedom. That's my understanding. I mean, we have so many ways one can construe the philosophical term centrism. I hope next series of lecture we are going to come out with another wonderful topic that all of you will be so delighted to be here to listen. So please don't shun away with us. Now that Parliament, we want to be part of you. You also do well to be part of us. On that note, let me thank the lecturer and thank the organizers for this wonderful lecture. May God bless all of us.
Thank you so much, the 2nd Deputy Speaker of Parliament, for that wonderful remark. Once again, we are grateful to the keynote speaker, the Honorable Osahin Alexander Afenyo-Markin, for that insightful presentation. To end it all, I will invite the Member of Parliament with the longest name, the Honorable Duke William Allen Kwame Amakwata Oforiata, to give us a closing prayer. Duke William Allen Kwame Amwako Ata Ofori Ata, Member of Parliament for Fantiakwa South.
Please let us pray. Our God, our Lord, our King, Father, we'd like to thank you for the gift of life today. Thank you for the opportunity to attend this lecture. Papa, this is an initiative that we started in Parliament. We thank you for the wisdom of the leadership of Parliament to introduce such studies and such lectures to the public. Father, as we leave this place, we pray that you grant us traveling mercies to our homes. We pray thee that the understanding or the takeaways will not only be hearers of it, but doers, such that our government and our country will be better off. This we ask in their holy names. Father, we pray and seal same in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you for the prayer. Please, kindly let's wait for the leadership.
And that is a live coverage from Parliament where the minority leader, Alexander Afenyo-Markin, addressed parliamentarians and also stakeholders in government policies and also people who matter as far as our governance is concerned. He made a lot of highlights regarding the state of our governance and also the legislature as well, and other key matters that are pressing on the need of on the issues or are pressing issues that matter to Ghanaians. And so that was a live coverage we brought to you from Parliament, and this is a first of its kind organized by the minority leader Alexander Kwamena Afenyo-Markin. We had some speeches before his speech. We had some speeches from the majority leader, that is Mahama Yariga, who addressed, in a way, current state of the nation and what the government is intending to do. We also had a brief speech by the Clerk of Parliament, Ebenezer Xtra, and he also made some highlights on how the legislator can impact the lives of the Ghanaian people. And so this is still Asaase Radio 99.5, and we will be bringing you more programming, so continue listening to Asaase Radio 99.5. My name is AsaasePa, and that's how we wrap up the live coverage of the public lecture that is themed on center-left, center-right, formulating policies that serve a growing democracy. Have a good evening.
Asaase Radio 99.5.